Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hello, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University, an associate lecturer at the Open University, and an independent writer, speaker and consultant for critical early years. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting oracy in primary and early years settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. In this episode, I'm delighted to introduce Louisa Reeves as our guest. Welcome to the podcast, Louisa. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Shaddai. Thank you for having me.
It's brilliant to have you here. And before we get into the topic of this week's discussion, perhaps you could just give a short introduction to yourself for our listeners.
Yes, so I'm Louisa Reeves. I'm a speech and language therapist by professional background, and I'm currently the Director of Policy and Evidence at Speech and Language UK. And we're a UK-wide children's charity. We work to support children who struggle with talking and understanding words.
Excellent. So to round up our fourth and final episode with Louisa, we'll be touching on speech and language across the curriculum and also thinking about policy. To start then, we've already spoken about some practical resources and strategies that teachers can do, but I'm curious about how this connects to broader curriculum planning and the broader curriculum content that teachers need to be supporting young children with. What does it mean for teachers to apply a more communication and language focused lens to their curriculum thinking?
Yeah, so I think the thing to bear in mind is that speech and language and communication skills underpin all learning. It is the medium mainly of instruction in schools, so we teach by talking, and we need our children to be able to learn through spoken language. So we need them to be able to understand a range of different vocabulary words and concepts. We need them to be able to cope with different grammatical structures. We'd be able to put together sentences and to kind of relay the knowledge and understanding they've acquired in their curriculum. And we need to give children and young people space to do that. So I think, one thing that has happened with the very full curriculum and with a lot of pressure on attainment and how schools are currently measured, there's been more of a drive to quite a formal way of learning. So children sitting being quite passive recipients of knowledge, and the knowledge-based curriculum as being really important. As a speech and language therapist, I have to say, hold my hands up, I've never really understood the debate between a knowledge versus skills-based curriculum, because I don't understand how you acquire the knowledge without having the skills, but I'm sure that there are teachers out there shouting at me even now. But for me, speech and language and communication is that underpinning skill across the whole curriculum. So, whether it's a PE lesson where you need to understand the rules of the game, you need to be able to communicate with your teammates, you need to be able to kind of reflect on your learning, whether it's a history lesson where you need to be able to discuss the significance of what occurred at this date, whether it's science and you need to be able to interrogate the results of an experiment and to relay that. Every single curriculum area involves talking and understanding words. And it's really important that when teachers are planning the curriculum, I think particularly in areas of disadvantage where perhaps children don't have the broad range of experiences, or where children have come from particular communities or live, so for example in an urban environment, where you haven't got the opportunity to go out and about into the countryside, photosynthesis might, need a little bit more explanation, for example. So think about the context, think about the language abilities and skills of your cohort, and really plan the curriculum to allow opportunities for you to check that young people have understood, have acquired the concept that you're teaching and are able to talk about it with confidence. Because if they can talk about it with confidence, they'll be able to write about it, and that is how ultimately performance is measured currently.
I'm listening to all of this and thinking that teachers will be listening along and thinking, this is great, but we are very constrained by a number of different factors. And I'm wondering, perhaps for senior leadership team members or head teachers listening into this, what can we do to make sure that that focus on speech and language is embedded and consistent across the school, so that one good teacher isn't just doing great bit of work in their class, but then that's falling by the wayside in other classroom contexts?
Yes, I think that's really important. I think it's really important that senior leaders create a culture in a school where communication is valued and where staff have the opportunity to check children and young people's communication skills kind of where they should be. So I think it is about having tools available so that teachers have that knowledge of kind of what typical language skills should look like for the age group that I'm teaching, how I can adapt my own language to support children, and having that kind of space within the school for talk. So, we hear in some schools of behaviour policies where there are silent corridors, where children are just not allowed to speak to each other. We would say that please don't do that in your school. There are other better ways to manage behaviour. As human beings, we're natural communicators. We need to be able to talk about what we've learned, to be able to use language to reflect on what we've learned. And that starts with that senior leadership setting that, do all the policies in the school reflect speech and language? Do we make sure that our inclusion policy is inclusive of children who have communication difficulties, that our behaviour policy is clear and easily accessible for all of our young people? Do we have curriculum planning that allows us to have time for conversation and debate, and ensuring that children have got a really strong, sound understanding of what it is that they are being taught, and that they can talk about that and discuss it.
You mentioned earlier about the perhaps more attainment-focused nature of schools these days, and there are those internal pressures that teachers are facing, but of course externally as well, from inspection frameworks and regulators like Ofsted. That can be a really difficult relationship to manage, given the expectations that they have for schools to meet those attainment targets. I'm interested in your take on all of that, and perhaps what Ofsted might better do to enable schools to flourish with regards to communication and language and supporting those children.
Yes, we have seen the new toolkit, which is out for consultation at the moment, and a number of Ofsted reports which have looked at the importance of spoken language. So the writing framework is out currently, and that does emphasise the importance of spoken language. So I think there are some tools that schools can use that Ofsted have produced themselves to make a rationale for why, as a school, we're choosing to be communication supportive, why we're having these policies and allowing children this time. I do think that there are elements within the framework, although it does seem quite complex, that would support developing a more inclusive environment in terms of including communication skills as part of learning. So I think, for schools there are some, some of those levers you could pull kind of with an Ofsted inspector to say, look, this is the context, we've used your guidance, this is why, having really clear rationale. We've got some guidance on our website about how senior leaders can create communication supportive schools and how they can think about how to frame that in terms of success for children. But we do know that children who struggle with speech and language are likely to do less well. So if you have a speech and language challenge, you're about 6 times less likely to do well in English and 11 times less likely to do well in maths at 11. And again, I think that speaks to that kind of underpinning skill for language, that the impact on maths is actually more significant than it is on English. But if you think about maths, you use loads of language in maths. And if you don't have those language skills, then you're going to struggle with showing how much maths knowledge you have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think we're sort of zooming out now to the area of politics and policy. We are just over a year into the Labour government, and we've seen a number of documents that have come out, including the Best Start in Life. And I'm curious about what your take is on that, how effective it might be in supporting those young children with communication and language differences. And of course, this all intersects with children who have special educational needs and differences as well. So what's your take on that document that's just come out, and is it going to be doing enough to be supporting those young children?
Yeah, well, we were really excited by what we heard, before the election from the Labour Party about the importance of early language, but also in terms of kind of oracy and that focus. So we had quite high expectations. I have to say that they're not been entirely met to date. We've got a really clear idea at Speech and Language UK of what we would like to see the government doing in this space around speech and language support, and that is quite broad and wide-ranging. So it is everything from having a clear focus in the curriculum review around making space for speech and language in the curriculum, to looking at how behaviour guidance is issued for schools so that can be more inclusive, looking overall at inclusion in terms of children with speech and language challenges who have special educational needs, how specialist resource bases can be set up in mainstream schools, the role of special schools. So at Speech and Language UK, we run 2 special schools ourselves, and they're not for profit, and they do allow children and young people to really kind of fulfil their potential. Our secondary school has 100% rate of young people leaving and going on either to further education or into employment. So, there's a lot that the special needs sector can teach mainstream, and we see speech and language as being a kind of a golden thread that runs all through that inclusion agenda that the government's talked about. In terms of the Best Start in Life, the guidance that's come out, again, really pleasing to see really clear mention of early language at 5 being the biggest indicator of, kind of future life chances. But not a lot in terms of actual kind of solid, this is what, as a government, we're going to do. We were very disappointed to hear, not from government directly, but from sort of government advisors, that educational healthcare plans for children with speech and language challenges, could be under review, could be lost in changes to the special educational needs system. We would be really concerned to see that happen, because actually children have a right to education, and as a society we should be supporting those vulnerable people to access that, and to make sure that they have the support in place and the legal protection for that support to be in place. So we'd like to see more. There have been some promising starts. So ministers quite often talk about the Nuffield Early Language programme, which is available for reception year, but it's only in reception year, and it's only for the poor children who can do that intervention. So we'd like to see more earlier, we'd like to see more later. We know there is an every child early language support for every child programme that runs in a small number of areas. That shows great promise. That's about using speech and language therapy expertise to train up schools and gives them support and programmes they can use. But we just, bigger and bolder, I think, probably, Shaddai, if I was kind of to sum it up.
Yeah, it sounds like there's no magic bullet, but rather lots of things that have the capacity to be scaled up with sufficient funding and support to make that real difference.
Yes, and some of those are not very expensive, so I think it is about, looking very carefully at the initial teacher training, at the early careers framework, at early years training, to make sure that speech, language and communication is a really strong thread for early career teachers, so that they've got that knowledge and skills, they can put that in place. It's about having information available for families much earlier. It's about looking at how we assess children's needs more promptly, and that we look at needs rather than having leaping to a diagnosis and then kind of using that as a bit of a gatekeeper to service. So I think there are some things that are not hugely costly, but are about kind of rethinking the current system so that it works better to include that over 2 million children who are struggling with speech and language challenges.
And I'm curious to know if you are hopeful for the future. Will we see those changes that you'd like to see in the next 3, 4, 5 years? What's it going to look like?
We are going to absolutely do our best to ensure they do. We have had engagement from Department for Education, from Department of Health and Social Care, who largely employ the speech and language therapists, and there's got to be that kind of intersection between those two departments, and from some of the ministers. So we hope that they are listening. I think they need to do a little bit more listening to the charity sector, but also to families themselves and to young people with lived experience who have lots of expertise to offer. But I'm hopeful. Yes, I think it may be a slower progress than we would perhaps like at Speech and Language UK, but I'm really hopeful we'll get there.
And it sounds like for teachers, as well as doing those practical changes or making those practical changes with the young children, there's work to be done at an advocacy level. And certainly that is a lot of the work that Speech and Language UK are doing. So I'm curious about teachers, educators, professionals listening to this. How can they stay abreast of the work you're doing, and how can they get more involved and advocate for the importance of communication and language?
So that is fantastic. I think if you're sitting listening to this as an educator or as a parent and you want to get involved, look at our website. We have a number of campaigns that are running. We're anticipating some legislation around special educational needs and disabilities coming in the autumn. We'll be doing lots of campaigning. We can give you advice on writing to your MP. You can get behind us. As a charity, we're always looking for funding. So if you're feeling like, you'd like to take part in you'd like to run a marathon for us, or invest in support for young people, then there are lots of different ways of getting involved, and lots of information as well on our website, which is all freely available. So and you can sign up to get regular information and updates from us.
Oh, that's so useful to know. I certainly look forward to staying on top of future development, and I'm sure the listeners do as well. So it's a really good place to end this fourth and final episode. Thank you so much, Louisa.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest Louisa for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Dr. Shaddai Tembo, and Louisa Reeves. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to relevant resources.